The soft amber glow of the light cast warm shadows on the wooden walls surrounding me as I stood in the tiny kitchen of our vacation home. The atmosphere was oppressive, despite the inviting atmosphere, and it was permeated by an unspoken tension. My heart thudded audibly as if it were attempting to escape from my chest, and my breath became more rapid. Aaron, the young handyman, stood in front of me, wiping the beads of perspiration from his forehead after completing the repair on the kitchen sink. His toned musculature were accentuated by the tightness of his faded t-shirt, a detail that I was unable to ignore. I was unaware of the extent to which the situation had escalated. Our eyes briefly intersected. A momentary gaze that appeared to be unintentional but was accompanied by a charged intensity that neither of us could deny. The uneasy silence between us was palpable, yet it was insufficient to conceal the quiet energy that permeated the space we shared. Aaron retreated slightly as if to disrupt the oppressive silence. His voice was both gentle and hoarse as he declared, "I have completed everything. I simply need to verify it one more time to ensure its accuracy." I bowed, but I refrained from speaking. I was astonished by the actions I was taking. The only thing that occupied my mind was an indescribable sensation, a magnetic and perilous force that drew me in closer to him. I approached him, gradually closing the gap between us until it was reduced to a mere breath. "Aaron," I murmured, my voice so low that it was nearly imperceptible. I was uncertain as to what I intended to say, or whether I should say anything at all. His eyes were filled with a combination of hesitation and conflict as he gazed at me. He uttered my name, Julia, as if it were both a warning and an invitation. Then neither of us said another word. At that instant, I ceased to contemplate any matter. This serene, small house that was intended to serve as a sanctuary, my devoted spouse Mark, or any repercussions at all. The tidal wave of emotion that encompassed me was the sole concern. I leaned in, and the closeness of Aaron's breath caused chills to run down my spine. Our lips collided in a kiss that was both impulsive and urgent. The struggle was palpable in the manner in which he kissed me back, his hand gently resting on my arm, as if he were divided between drawing me closer and pushing me away. The paradox of performing an action that felt both right and wrong, perfect and utterly reckless, caused my pulse to race wildly. However, Aaron abruptly retreated after only a few seconds. His face was awash in a whirlwind of confusion and agony as he retreated. He stated, his voice quivering, "We are unable to do this. I am unable to." I was transfixed as if I had been abruptly roused from a dream. Although I was unaware of whether I was apologizing to Aaron, Mark, or myself, I murmured, "I'm sorry." Aaron's eyes were full of emotions that I was unable to discern for an extended period of time as he gazed at me. He then turned and hurriedly exited the kitchen without saying a word. The silence was punctuated by the sound of the door closing behind him, signaling the conclusion of a moment that should never have existed. I remained in the oppressive silence, my mind whirling with disorientation and remorse. However, beneath the weight of those emotions, there was an additional emotion that I was unable to disregard, a fleeting sensation. It was raw, intense, and perilously thrilling. From that moment forward, I was aware that nothing would ever be the same. Aaron exited, leaving me alone in the tranquil kitchen. I was unable to generate any other ideas, as the query continued to reverberate in my mind. What had I done? How could I have permitted events to escalate so rapidly? However, it is possible that the solution did not reside in this moment, but rather in the past, where seemingly insignificant details had progressively brought me to this juncture. I genuinely believed that I was the luckiest woman alive when I married Mark a few years ago. Mark was the epitome of perfection, possessing maturity, success, and an inexhaustible supply of kindness. Our life together appeared to be faultless, and he treated me with respect and affection. We enjoyed a comfortable residence in the suburbs, consistent employment, and ambitious aspirations for the future. However, on occasion, a life that appears to be flawless can mask imperfections that are only palpable to those who are experiencing them. I was initially unaware of the increasing distance between Mark and myself. He was perpetually preoccupied with his livelihood, and I endeavored to convince myself that it was the norm. He frequently arrived home late, feeling drained and fatigued. At times, he was unable to discuss even the most basic matters. We progressively transitioned from the rare evenings we spent together to hurried, superficial conversations and ultimately silence. However, I harbored affection for him and believed that by exercising patience, I could ameliorate the situation. I had anticipated that Mark's acquisition of the vacation home would serve as an opportunity to mend our relationship. I imagined evenings spent cooking together, reclining outside to observe the sunset, and savoring tranquil moments that would strengthen our bond. However, the reality was significantly inferior to those aspirations. I soon found myself spending more time alone in the home than with Mark. He frequently returned to the city to address urgent projects, despite his good intentions, as he was frequently consumed by work. I began to sense the emptiness within me in that seclusion. I harbored no animosity toward Mark. I was unable to assign any responsibility to him. However, the lack of connection and the coldness left me feeling confined in my own existence, akin to a swimmer in still water without a destination in sight. And then Aaron arrived. Aaron had been contracted to restore the roof following a severe storm. He was youthful, energetic, and exuded an effortless charm that immediately elicited a sense of comfort in me upon our initial encounter. At first, I did not hold him in high regard beyond his status as a diligent and compassionate employee. However, as the days passed and I observed Aaron more frequently, I came to the realization that a part of me, which had been quiescent for an extended period, was beginning to reawaken. Aaron's initial smile toward me was brief yet sincere. It was not the same as the perfunctory nods that I had become acclimated to receiving from Mark. Aaron observed the minute details of my appearance, such as the type of tea I preferred and the manner in which I tied my hair during balmy weather. The moments I anticipated the most each day were our brief conversations, which centered on the weather and his work. I assured myself that these emotions were innocuous, nothing more than a brief burst of enthusiasm, a sliver of brightness in the monotony of existence. However, I progressively began to generate rationales for conversing with Aaron on a more frequent basis. A sticky door, a faulty faucet, any justification for his continued presence. Each time, I sensed that I was drawing nearer to a boundary that I was aware I should not cross. Aaron was not wholly unaware of the situation, although he never explicitly stated it. His gaze was occasionally too prolonged, and he responded to my inquiries with a smile that persisted in my mind for days after he had departed. However, we both maintained silence, as if the silence could somehow prevent the unavoidable. I am filled with both regret and tenderness as I reflect on our early days together. It is possible that my circumstances would have been different if I had not experienced such isolation. It is possible that I would not have observed Aaron's smile had Mark paid me more attention. However, what has been done is done. I am now compelled to confront the repercussions of my actions, which I am uncertain if I am capable of withstanding. I gazed out the kitchen window, observing the sunlight wane and the darkness that was encroaching. The room was engulfed in shadows, which reflected the vacant sensation that was developing within me. Memories of the past failed to provide solace. The fragility of my current reality was only further underscored by their actions. I was uncertain as to the nature of my inquiry. However, one thing was certain. I had long ago relinquished the tranquility that I had once known. I can still vividly recall the afternoon when Aaron first arrived to repair the roof that had been extensively damaged by a severe storm. Mark had reached out to him via a nearby repair service as he was hesitant to dedicate his weekend to the task. Standing in the living room, I observed Aaron's arrival through the expansive window. In the afternoon sunlight, his tall, youthful frame was conspicuous, and he confidently carried a large tool pack over his shoulder. I did not give him much consideration at that time. We were fortunate to locate him, as he was a proficient technician. Aaron's presence at the vacation house progressively became a familiar aspect of life in the days that followed. Each morning he arrived with an unexpected amount of enthusiasm and a welcoming smile. Initially, I maintained a respectful demeanor, offering tea and asking a few innocuous questions about his work, all while maintaining my distance. However, there was something about his laid-back demeanor and easygoing temperament that elicited a sense of comfort in me that I had not experienced in a long time. Aaron was intensely focused, but there were instances of warmth that alleviated his seriousness. At one point, while I was delivering a glass of water to him, he glanced up from the ladder, squinting into the sunlight with a playful expression. "You are exceedingly generous to provide this item," he said, his deep voice resonating affectionately. "I should have done it myself." I reciprocated his smile, but I was unable to disregard the manner in which his straightforward words elicited a sense of recognition in me that I had not felt in years. The frequency of our conversations increased as the days progressed. I occasionally inquired about his family, other projects he had worked on, and the mundane little things in life. Aaron, on the other hand, exhibited a quiet fascination about me, despite consistently maintaining a respectful distance. He never inquired about Mark in an overly intrusive manner. Rather, he would offer a knowing smile whenever I mentioned my spouse. However, I observed something more in his eyes, a level of sincere attentiveness that I no longer perceived in Mark. Then there was the day when Aaron was repairing the window frame in the backyard. I departed with 2 steaming cups of coffee and sat down on the bench in the vicinity to observe him at work. He donned a thin, faded t-shirt with the sleeves pulled up to expose his toned arms. Despite the fact that my cheekbones were burning, I was compelled to refrain from gazing for an extended period. Yet, his smile was so disarming that it nearly melted the walls I had attempted to maintain, as he turned and captured my gaze. He expressed his gratitude by removing the coffee from my grasp. I was in dire need of a respite. We remained in silence for a few minutes, but it was not the type of silence that felt uncomfortable. It was a serene silence, as if we both understood that there was no necessity for words. He then spoke in a manner that was both genuine and composed. "Do you spend a significant amount of time in this location? This residence is exquisite." I faintly smiled as I shook my head. "Not really. Mark acquired it with the expectation that we would have more time to spend together. However, his schedule is consistently hectic." I was unsure of the reason for my admission, but as the words tumbled out, I came to the realization that my voice was tinged with the melancholy that I had not intended to convey. Aaron did not respond, but his gaze conveyed that he comprehended the situation. He refrained from advocating for additional information, opting instead to silently nod. However, a subtle and unspoken bond between us was established at that moment. A connection that was impossible for either of us to deny, yet we both knew that we should not acknowledge it. With time, I began anticipating Aaron's arrival on a daily basis. I began devising justifications to prolong his presence, such as inquiring about irrelevant aspects of the project or seeking assistance with minor issues that did not require immediate resolution. I was aware that I should not do it, but I was unable to prevent myself from doing so. Then that evening, everything descended into chaos. Mark was required to return to the city for an urgent meeting, which resulted in my isolation at the vacation home. I recall the agonizing sensation of emptiness, as if the house's silence was bearing down on me, intensifying my isolation. Aaron was summoned to inspect the kitchen sink. I was aware that it was merely an excuse, but at that moment I was indifferent. I experienced a brief sensation of warmth that temporarily supplanted the ache in my chest when he arrived, accompanied by his characteristically friendly smile. While I stood nearby, I discreetly observed him as he worked. Upon his completion, I extended an invitation to him to remain for dinner. Initially, he declined. However, upon my persistence, he reluctantly consented. A tension that was irrefutable was simmering beneath the surface, despite the fact that dinner began light and easy. We both felt a profound weight in every glance and smile, a weight that neither of us acknowledged openly. I then stood up to pour additional wine, and he approached me. I felt my heart pounding so fiercely that it was almost audible, and the distance between us vanished. I turned around and our eyes locked, and the world appeared to halt. At that instant, I was aware that all boundaries had been eradicated. I am unable to recall who initiated the interaction. However, I was aware that I had crossed a line that I would never be able to undo when our lips met. His hesitation was mirrored in my consciousness, and the kiss was characterized by both longing and conflict. However, in that instant, neither of us was able to halt. We remained in silence after the event concluded. Aaron gazed at me with eyes that were weighed down by remorse. He apologized, his voice quivering and low. The door gently closed behind him as he turned and departed, leaving me alone with the chaos that was raging in my mind. I was unable to fall asleep that evening, as I sat in the darkness. I had not abruptly forfeited my sense of self-worth. I had forfeited an even more precious possession, the tranquility that I had exerted so much effort to preserve within myself. The atmosphere between Aaron and me was never the same since that fateful night. In the days that followed, I endeavored to maintain a facade of normalcy, attempting to conceal the pandemonium that was raging within me. I persisted in my habit of rising early, preparing breakfast, and enjoying a cup of coffee. Mark returned from his business trip with the same level of dedication and enthusiasm as before, engaging in conversation with me regarding his professional and personal life. However, my chest tightened and my pulse pounded each time I caught a glimpse of Aaron through the window, as if I were ensnared in a sin that was too significant to confess. Aaron's usual ease of entry into the home was no longer evident. He maintained his distance while laboring in the yard, refraining from engaging in casual conversations or casting longing glances. The silence, however, did not alleviate the tension. Rather, it penetrated my mind like a keen blade. Whenever I passed by the area where he was working, I could sense his eyes briefly on me, but they never lingered for more than a second. I was aware that he was experiencing the same emotional turmoil as I was, despite the fact that we never discussed the events that transpired. Mark left one afternoon to meet a friend, and I remained behind. Aaron was in the backyard repairing something, and I resolved not to confront him. I believed that the most effective course of action was to allow the situation to dissipate as if it had never occurred. However, that resolve dissipated the instant I observed him through the window. The conflict I was concealing deep within myself was mirrored in his figure, and the weariness on his countenance. I exited the building while holding a tumbler of iced water. Aaron's eyes briefly indicated a moment of uncertainty as I approached, but they quickly returned to their customary tranquility. He expressed his gratitude by accepting the glass without facing me. "Are you in good health?" I inquired with a subdued voice that was tinged with apprehension. He maintained silence for a brief period, as if he were contemplating the significance of his words. "I am in good health," he ultimately stated. "It's just, things are hard." I felt a sense of tension in my body as a result of his straightforward response. I desired to convey to him that I shared his sentiments and was consumed by the events that transpired between us. However, the words lodged in my larynx. Aaron gazed at me, and for the first time, his gaze remained fixed on mine for more than a brief moment. I observed a profound sadness, struggle, and anguish in his eyes. He stated with a voice that was both steady and weighty with finality, "I believe I should cease. I should not be employed here any longer." I was aware that he was correct, despite the fact that his words struck me like a knife to the heart. I did not respond, rather I nodded, sensing the void within me expanding. However, just as I believed that everything was about to come to an end, fate once again intervened. The following day, the newly repaired roof had a leak that was disclosed by the heavy rain. Aaron was contacted by Mark, who was prevented from addressing the matter independently due to his excessive workload. Upon his arrival, the air was immediately dense and oppressive, and tension was palpable. Mark was at home this time, and his presence provided me with a sense of solace. However, Aaron and I were once again left alone, compelled to enter a situation that we had been attempting to avoid, when Mark was required to leave for a few hours to attend to business. I occupied myself in the kitchen, washing dishes and concentrating on anything that would prevent my mind from straying to the man in the adjacent living room. However, despite my best efforts, I was unable to disregard the significance of his presence. It was as though the air between us had become increasingly dense. Aaron was standing by the couch, gazing downward at the floor as if he were engaged in an internal struggle when I eventually entered the living room. I hesitated, intending to retreat. However, he interrupted me before I could. "Julia," he said, his voice slightly trembling and gruff. I halted, but I refrained from turning around. "What is it?" I inquired, endeavoring to maintain a consistent tone of voice. He stated, "I am uncertain as to what to do," which caused me to turn to him. For the first time, neither of us attempted to conceal our emotions as our eyes met. His gaze exposed the suppressed emotions, the anguish, and the struggle that we had both been experiencing. I was unaware of who initiated the movement. However, we were once again in close proximity, and I was certain that there was no turning back. This was the second occasion on which we violated the line, and this time, there was no hesitation or immediate contrition. Silence prevailed, a subdued recognition that we had entered a realm in which neither of us belonged. Aaron did not speak after the event concluded. He departed in the same manner as before, leaving me alone with the tidal wave of emotions that raged within me. I sat on the settee, gazing out the window, and the weight of the change that had occurred between us was palpable. I was aware that I could not persist in this manner, but I was also unsure of how to escape the chaos we had wrought. What I felt for Aaron was no longer merely a transient infatuation. It had become an integral part of me, and that was the most terrifying aspect. I was uncertain about the nature of our conclusion. However, I was certain of one thing. Everything underwent an irreversible transformation from this point forward. The story's just beginning. There are more broken hearts and dark secrets ahead. Hit like, subscribe, and keep exploring with Love Missteps.